Have you been washed in the blood of the slain lamb?
Don't get me started.
I know. Those Baptists, it's in my veins.
I'm a recovering Baptist.
Yeah, me too. My dad and brother are preachers.
Same thing.
Let's go.
Let's go. So we have to find our way back into the story. Let the honey of these words land like drops of lightning into your reluctant heart.
And you know what time it was, right? You don't know what time it was? Well, it was a time before time was stretched straight on the rack of infinite progress.
It was a time when the world was as wild as the talons of a hawk, fresh as the cheek of a baby's bottom, and tender as the wind that shakes the barley.
Was a time when the antlers of the elk still reached to the highest heaven, and the tail of the badger still reached to the deepest underworld.
It was a time when the world was a red deer dancing through the whole of the universe on the back of a great black whale, and wherever that red deer went, wherever that black whale went, flowers fell from their mouths. A time of glorious, humming trouble.
You know, we could do this all day.
Yeah.
So there was a boy, you remember the boy? You remember the rusty man in the cage? What about that spring? Do you remember the spring?
Something about a spring.
And guarding the spring so that it won't be wronged, right? You remember that? Remember when that happened to you? Remember the golden hair? And then hiding the golden hair. And then Iron John said, well, that's it. You have to go. You can't stay here with me. And he gave him the road.
He couldn't go back. Do you know that feeling? I can't go back. I can't go back to that. And he set out, and they say he took the long road and the low road. Time passes. Maybe he sleeps under hedges and over open great stars, by small rivers. Maybe the wild animals run through his dreams. Until one day he came to a city, and he tried to find work, and he could find none. But he knew in the middle of this city was a great castle, and sometimes there comes a point in a man's life where the only place he can go to work is in a castle and for a king.
But he didn't go to the front door, he went to the back door. And the cook found him and said, all right, you can clean the fireplace. You can keep the ashes cleared out of the stove. And so he began to work in the ashes.
It's hot work in a kitchen, unglamorous and unwitnessed. And you would see him there in the early morning, before anyone gathered, quietly running his fingers through ash. Sticks to everything, ash, but is seemingly so weightless. He was an ash boy. So he learned to prepare meals, he learned to exist under the pressure the cook would put him under. Cooks are kind of magicians. Until one day, the cook looked at him and he said, "You know, we're short-staffed today. Someone needs to bring this meal to the king. And today, buddy, it's you. You have an audience with the king." "Not me. I have scurvy. I have a mange. He wouldn't want the likes of me around him. Couldn't someone else go? Some sweet scullery maid with a honeyed web of curves. That would please him more than me."
So he carried the dish in. He had his hat on, didn't he? And the king said, "What's this? Don't you have any manners?
"Take it off."
Take the hat off. You remove your hat when you're in the presence of the king." And he said, "Oh, I have a terrible oozing sore on my scalp."
"I think some of it dripped into the soup."
The king said, "Get the fuck out of my sight." And he called the cook in and he said, "I don't want that boy working in my kitchen. How could you have such a contaminated boy working in my kitchen?"
But I tell you what, sometimes cooks, sometimes magicians have wilder insights into a situation than a king does. And you know that boy, he was popular. They liked him. Do you remember the Rumi poem, "Has anyone seen the boy?" Something like that. He had many things in his pocket. And so they couldn't quite bring themselves to get rid of him, to cast him out. And in fact, they passed him into the hands of working for a gardener. Imagine that. That heat, the pressure of the kitchen, and then suddenly out with spring, summer, winter, and autumn. To plant things into the ground and watch them grow. To witness great storms. All of this suffused the young man with the natural world and the sense of a craft. Hoeing, planting, his muscles grow strong, his eyes grow subtle to the movement of that walled garden he was in.
So he worked there in the garden, and in the sunlight, among the fragrance of the flowers. It was good. One day it was hot.
Very hot.
It was very hot. The sweat was pouring down the back of his neck, and he thought, well, no one's looking. No one's around. He just took his hat off just for a moment to feel the cool breeze blow through that golden hair and cool the back of his neck. But the sunlight hit that hair, and a dazzling array of light went shining up right straight through the window of the princess. And shining, dancing on her wall, she saw that light, and she said, "What in the world is making that light?" And she ran to the balcony to look down into the garden and see what she could see.
Women know when you've taken your hat off. They know. The old stories say she jumped off the bed. It's a beautiful moment when the light of the young man actually comes into the room and radiates the roof over her bed. And so surely, what is the sound we must make in a story when the fair Ilana or the fair whoever she is comes in? We must make a loud sighing noise. Ah. She called down, "You, boy, in the garden, a gardener's boy, now bring me some flowers." And he did. He gathered a small posy of the most delicate, the most fragile, the most fragrant, and the wildest of flowers, and he started to make his way to her. He was stopped by the gardener, who said, "What in the world are you doing? Don't bring her those flowers. Bring her these ones. We've got a fucking hydroponics and a greenhouse, and we're GM flowers. They're bigger, they're brighter. $7.99 a pack. Those are the ones she wants." And he said this: "The wild flowers will please her more. The wild flowers will please her more." And he carried on his way.
He went up to her room, and he stepped into the door and presented her with the wildflowers. And she was pleased, and she was quick. And before he could move, she snatched the hat off of his head.
Yes, she did.
And the hair came tumbling down. He tucked it back in, didn't he?
He did. And as he was leaving, she gave him some gold coins. I think we would call them doubloons. She gave him some gold doubloons. Did he keep them? No, he did not. This is a very beautiful detail. He was a man that gave coins to the children. He was a man that gave coins to the children. So he took himself down to the garden, gave them to the gardener's kids. Lovely. Said, "You can play with these." I like that. Maybe they buried them. We don't know. But another day passes. It gets hot again. Again, his scarf instantly reveals some of his hair. She sees it. She calls down, "Bring me the flowers."
Boy!
Sorry.
Oh boy!
Yeah.
Oh boy!
Yeah, a bit more seduction in her tone today. "Bright pulse of my whole understanding, blossoming branch, sky boy of the dawn, would you consider for a second coming to my chambers and bringing me the flowers?" The troubadours live and die for moments like this.
And so again he gathered wildflowers and took them up to her room. And this time, when she tried to grab his hat, he deftly moved to the side. And she did not see his golden hair that day.
She tugged on it as the... Easy! Easy. The hat.
She tugged on it. She tugged on it. The hat, that is.
The end. Yeah. Taxi for the prince.
And after she tugged on it, she tried to give him the gold coins again. And what did he do?
He took him again to the children. The children now had a little bounty of doubloons, shining. Day 3, have you noticed in the stories how often things come in threes? Now today, her tone was even more imploring, even more beguiling, more enchanting. Did I tell you she had hair like the midnight and eyes like the morning? Hair like the midnight, eyes like the morning. And he was not entirely displeased when she called. In fact, maybe the little posy was already cut and prepared. He scurried up, a couple of lines of Neruda under his breath, and made his way into the chamber.
But again, she failed to remove the hat. And this time, when she offered him the gold coins, he said, "No, that's enough. That's enough." Now, meanwhile, while this was happening, there was a rumor of war. The king was very worried because there was a great army conquering other lands, making its way toward their country.
Even the gardener's boy had heard of this. Even the gardener's boy had seen the great warriors around the king preparing for battle. He had seen the swords being sharpened and glinting. He had seen the armor. He had seen the excitement in their eyes of being tested. And he too longed to defend this place he was growing to love. Was there a horse for him?
Well, he said to the men, he said, "I'm a man full grown now, and I'm ready to go to war." And the men laughed. And they said, "Oh, all right. Yeah, we'll have a horse for you.
Fantastic!
We'll have a horse for you. You just wait till we're gone.
Okay.
And then go look in the stables, and there will be your horse."
Uh-huh. Well, I know I can trust you. I know that.
So he did that, and he waited till they were all gone. And he went, and he looked in the stable, and there was only one horse left. It had 3 legs.
3.
3 legs. And it walked. How did it walk, Robert? And he climbed on that shameful horse. Was not the horse he had dreamed of. You understand? This was not the horse he had dreamed of. This was not the horse he expected. This was not the horse he deserved, was it?
No, he didn't sign up for this.
Nevertheless, he did climb on the back of that hobbling horse. And he made his way out of the city. And we will leave him there, riding that ignominious horse. Blah blah.
Blah, blah.
Blah blah.
Blah, blah.
Blah 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 blah. Ignominious. Ignominious. Thank you. See, I learn at least one thing every time I come here. Ignominious. Yep.
So, John was talking yesterday about the diagnostic quality of a story. It's like some weird X-ray. And so just for a second, don't be afraid of the silence. Just let your imagination go through that story and where we were and all the things that happened. Many images, much resonance in there. See where you are in it and just give us an image. Just tell us where you are.
3-legged horse.
Hiding the golden hat.
You can trust me.
Get the fuck out of here.
No more golden coins, that's enough.
Yeah.
The light reflecting on the ceiling.
Sifting through the ashes.
Muttering a few Neruda lines.
Taking off the head. That means
Wildflowers.
Ready for war.
giving the coins to the children to play with.
Going in the back door.
No.
Not what I bargained for.
Starting to build the wall gun.
Yeah.
That moment when she sees her golden hair.
Working in the garden.
Working in the kitchen.
Broken promises.
Oh, boy. Coming out of your head.
Skyboy of the dawn.
Waiting to attract the princess.
Cook gas magician.
It's interesting, isn't it, that she's on her bed. You know, we're back to pillows and heat and femininity again. And some alchemy is going on, something is cooking in him. And it's just so lovely, that detail of that sort of golden light that just comes in and suffuses.
Something marvelous about that idea that it's an oblique, it's not direct. The first sight of it is, this different kind of sight.
Someone was talking to me this morning about that word archetypal. And I was saying last night how it's not a word we're massively fond of because the imagination can't flood into it somehow, for me anyway. I'm paralyzed by that word. But what we do talk about is when you talk about an archetypal image or an energy, it's not necessarily friendly. And if you hit it straight on, it's probably too much for you to handle and you may not live for a long time. And sometimes in myths and stories, when you are facing a very strong presence, the way you negotiate them is through their reflection on a shield. It's not full on, it's not face to face, you're not sitting there like that, it's diffused in that way. And it could be the way that woman needed to meet the radiance of that man was in the very way you suggested. Something like that.
I'm curious why he can't show his gold hair to the king. It's obviously very important.
Well, there's this idea that we've been talking about for years, relating to other stories as well, but it's what we've boiled down to the phrase, the danger of showing your gold too early. Showing your gold too early.
And to the wrong people.
To the wrong people, yeah. And so, if you're cooking, if you're cultivating, if you're gaining an artistic discipline, or a spiritual discipline, whatever you want to call it, a practice, cultivating something, and you show it too early, you can get wiped out.
This is the young student who shows his poem to his professor too early, too soon, and the professor says, "This is terrible." And he never writes again. Whereas had he waited a year or 2 or 5.
Well, the flip side of that, like, I know someone in this affected directly, and that is, it's just a guess of mine, but for the opposite be true, that if someone offers you a big pile of money and says, "Here, write me a bunch of wonderful songs," or a wonderful show, does that can have the same effect as just shuts you down, you can't do anything?
I hate advances for just that reason. Yeah, I'll take them, but I do hate them.
Recently, I heard about some people who had given a huge pile of money to a person I know to write a bunch of stuff, and they're real concerned about whether they're ever going to get their money back, and they probably aren't.
Right. And these days in the writing world, that happens a lot less than it used to,
Yeah.
Is that about developing a core, like a self, so that when you do share your soul, you do share your gold, that you can protect yourself, you can defend and honor yourself?
Yeah.
It's the image, the moment where she's tugging on his hat. You'll probably get some women tugging on your hats when you come back from this conference. Tell me about it. What happened, John? What happened? What happened? In a small way, it's that moment. It is all of this is requiring an incubation. It's requiring an incubation. Something that we touched upon yesterday was the idea that this initiatory process is the walk of an entire life. It's not the moment in the forest. initiation in its simplest form is always triadic. It involves leaving the community, a period of trial, wonder, and the rest of it, but it also involves a return. And for me, it's the return in the 21st century is the most complicated bit. It's the bit almost which is the most deadly at this point, because we are living in a culture that has amnesia or active hostility to that process. And passivity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the way Joseph Campbell laid it out, he said, you make this journey, you cultivate a style, and his shorthand for that was the jewel. And you're carrying this jewel, and now you have to return to the world, right? So the example he gave was a young painter going to the galleries in New York.
Yes.
And what do they say? They say, "Oh, we love your work, but right now what's selling is flowers. Can you paint flowers?" Right? And then Joe said you have three choices at that point. Three choices.
Yeah.
I'll give them to you real quick. One is you paint flowers, in which case you lose the jewel. Two is you say, "Fuck the world. I'm going to go live in a hut and paint what I want to paint." And then you don't deliver the jewel, right? So you lose it. And then the third way, he said, is find that portion of the world which is prepared to receive your jewel. That's a very difficult task.
Yeah. But it's the only one.
It's the only one.
It's the only one.
Danny, can you say that one more time, please?
Say what part? The third one? Find that portion of the world which is prepared to receive your jewel.
If across the world in tribal systems forever, it's always implicit. It's always implicit. You have to bring something back. Now, the problem for me as a young guy at the end of the 20th century was I was saying, I had no idea what community means. I have no relationship to it. If I do, I feel hostile. I have nothing to bring back and no one to bring it to. You know? And what Danny is saying and what Campbell was saying is you have to pay attention to small things. So you don't yet want to be ringing Bill Moyers up and saying, I've got a 6-part thing all about the myth, and you need to pay attention to a small thing. It might be a devotion to a book for a period of time. I was saying yesterday about it may be useful for you for a while to say, well, my mother is Mirabai, my father is Taliesin. I just plucked them out of the air. Mirabai was an Indian saint, Taliesin was a Gaelic bard. But for some point, you have to be careful. Otherwise, as it says in Iron John, you're someone that talks about your white light experiences at parties. And then they utter the immortal words, well, Johnny, I'm so happy for you. Much death occurs in that moment. Tim.
I just want to give a simple example of the first response, the first request that I ever got to republish my first poem, Men Don't Dance in America. I got a letter asking if they could republish it in their national newsletter. And the man's handwriting, it just did something to me. So I said, I don't know your publication, send me a copy. And I really wanted to have this on the national stage. And he sent me a copy, and it was the first year that we're doing these men's conferences, and it was a magazine for pedophiles. Wow. Oh, God. Can you imagine if I would have allowed them to publish Men Don't Dance in America in a pedophile newsletter? Yeah. I thank God I, didn't like the man's handwriting and asked, to see that first.
Thank you, Tim. It's beautiful.
Orland, and relative to what you talked about this morning, I'd like to claim ignorance of this story when this occurred, but I had read this story before it occurred. So I knew it. I had heard the story, and I still fell into it. So in regards to your friend, whether or not, Because what happened to me relative to this taking off the hat thing is I came to this conference several years ago. I was struck by the teachings, the teachers. I went to one of the teachers' classes, and I think I was, following the call, answering the call, doing this men's work, and it brought something out in me. And at this class, I think, my hat came off. And a princess was there who called me to her chamber, almost literally. And I told myself, it's for something else. I went to this chamber, and I fell into that thing with this princess. And the problem is, she was married, I was married, and some damage occurred. Not irreparable, thankfully. It didn't all fall apart, but it was giving that gold away too early. And so it's taken a while, a few years, to regain those things that I had, to go beyond it even, but a much more subtle way of it was a lesson. I learned that lesson, that there is an attraction as this comes about. My hair has turned golden, there it is, and there's an attraction. People out there don't see it. So that's what I was struck by with the story. As you were talking about, I was like, this is the metaphor that I lived. Very interesting for me and really poignant. So thank you.
Thank you. Here's a question.
What if you have no idea that you have gold under your hat? What does that feel like?
We tell children all over this country every day they don't have gold. We tell them the gifted children in another school, another classroom, and you didn't bring one. You have nothing to offer the world. You're not gifted, not college maturity. Yeah, I was told that in the 9th grade.
Looks like addiction. Always looking outside to be whole and complete in kids and teenagers. I see it all the time.
One of my experiences is that not always being able to be attuned to kind of having the golden hair and then being pulled into a relationship with somebody that was continually telling me, you're right, you have no gold hair, you have no gold hair. And so it's like this self-feeding thing. And there's a certain freedom in getting out of that dynamic.
Fathers, coaches, and drill sergeants tell you very often, you're a piece of shit. And I'm going to break you down and show you that there's nothing in you that's shiny. Some fathers, some coaches, and some drill sergeants. And then when you're finished with that process, alcohol looks mighty good. Mighty good. Pornography looks mighty good. Mighty good. So the mentor comes in and says, I think I see a strand or two turning gold right before my eyes. Your whole head is not golden, but I think I'm seeing a strand or two that your father, your coach, and your drill sergeant let slip by them. Now here's how you grow more.
Yeah.
Here's what you got to do next. Oh, there's 5 more hairs coming out of your head. That's very good. I'm beginning to like that. But see, one of the things I believe, I don't know that anybody will agree with it, but people always say, I want to find a mentor, and I've written a little bit about this, and I've always suggested that it's not your place to find a mentor. It's your place to be found. Not in a passive way. You got to show up where they might be, but that they find you. You don't find them. When you go looking, it goes back to what we were saying last night. When you go looking for your mentor, you're probably going looking for your father. And then when you get there, he'll reject you or not embrace you, and then you'll be pissed off at. us. You ever gotten pissed off at because you didn't go, oh yes, I will, you know?
I love what you're saying because it reminds me of the Bill Stafford line, maybe I'm a king.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Uh-huh.
And one way you can react to the kind of shaming that you've just described is to say, no, fuck you, I'm brilliant. I'm fucking brilliant. And I will fly over my family, and I will fly over my pain, and I will fly over my background until I don't ever have to think about it again. There are two roads you can take of many. And the trouble with that is that you don't have the grounding that you've just described of an older man saying one or two strands, because that is actually all we need. There is a ravenous part. If we've been shamed, there's a ravenous quality in our desire to get past that because it's an uncomfortable place. And for me, as a veteran of the music industry, like Danny, and as being a musician, it's all about the golden hair. It's all about having a lot of golden hair, preferably in a huge afro that everyone can see like a fucking halo. You know? Mm-hmm. There's a lot to give up. There's a lot of. They're not into phrases like appropriate sacrifice, and that's what part of this is about.
This thing about Dylan and that biography thing on public television, and Allen Ginsberg was talking about him, and about the song Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and about when he said, I'm gonna stand on the ocean until I start sinking. Allen Ginsberg said he was standing up on his hind legs, and everybody knew it. And then the line after that is, I'm gonna know my song well before I start singing, which is what we're talking about. And I heard this quote on the radio where, in '67 when they were in England touring with the Hawks, and then he's getting booed.
Yeah.
And he says, does it bother you that they're booing you? He says, I know this is good. So, I just whipped that out of him.
Back up just a second. Him writing out, number one, being left with the horse. And I grew up in Vietnam War, and they went over there with these M16s, and it's a high-tech weapon, and it rains for 6 months, and they don't work. And we scrambled, and we spent tons of money because only the officers got hand weapons, got sidearms. So we broke all kinds of laws, but we sent all kinds of handguns over to Vietnam because they weren't being given the stuff that's going to keep them alive. And the sadness of that. And then my friend is kind of a right-wing guy, I'm a left-wing guy, and there's stuff in Iraq that's not available. And he says, you want to send $50 to send the stuff over here. And I'm tremendously against that war. But I'm not against the guys that are dying, that aren't fucking even given a horse with 4 legs. They go over there with shit.
Yeah.
So I sent the money, and we got to stop doing that. We got to stop sending people over to die because only officers get handguns. And give me a break. They don't fight, and they're given handguns. Anyway, there's sadness, and I think I'm going to stop right here. I think the story's over for me. I need to stay with this sadness until something happens inside me where I can make some sort of shift in my life. I think I need to go to Washington. I'm going to retire. I think I need to Washington. I think I need to sit there for about 3 days in front of the White House and say, this got to stop. So I'm not sure where it's going to take me, but I'm done with this particular story until I can find a way to say, not fucking here, not again. We're not going to send these kids over there to die without their stuff. And that's it. I'm done.
Thank you.
Anyone?
I was curious about the coins and the generosity, giving them away. Obviously, he was working from a different place than most young men who were wanting the coins and wanting to pocket them. Can you comment a little bit on that? I just see it as, to me, it shows a generous spirit, which is, you know, that shows the potential of that king inside, generous king.
There's a lovely, I do a lot of work with leadership. Just before I came here, I was on there's a Desmond Tutu has a leadership gathering in Oxford, and I work a lot with the young African leaders coming out and into a Western climate. And my job really is just to get them telling their own stories again, their indigenous stories. Another word for initiation is, they call it the world turned upside down. And it means for a period of time, the values that have been drilled into you since you were a kid are fucking nowhere. And if you don't know what story you're in, you take the gold too early. You take the coins too early. And stories often illustrate a kind of the path you would hope, that the procession you hope this would go in. And the fact that he doesn't take the coins, just on one level for me, is so beautiful, that already there's that generative quality in him. There's the quality of the king in him, because it's something that he's radiating out and he's giving to the next generation. But for me, it's an initiatory symbol. What do you think, Danny?
I think you're right, and I love the idea that it's a break with the ordinary use of what is given that you can count on in the system.
Yeah.
And he's not even giving it to the poor, he's giving it to the children to play with.
It's not a trust fund.
You know, and it reminds me of that little Machado poem, mankind owns 4 things that are no good at sea. See, if you're going on an initiatory journey, these things that you can count on in the ordinary world, in your ordinary life, are no good anymore, right? So mankind owns 4 things that are no good at sea: anchor,
rudder,
rudder,
anchor, oars, and the fear of going down.
and the fear of going down. That's not gonna do you any fucking good. You got to get rid of that.
Good luck.
I'm curious to hear your reflection on that moment when he says no more coins. Because it seems to me there's a power shift there where no longer she holy and above me, but we're now equals. And what do you see in that moment?
There is the Sufis. Coleman has written a beautiful book that I really recommend. It's a really small book called Feeling the Shoulder of a Lion. And he talks about lion energy. And his Rumi translations are often very sweet. And you don't get the harsh. Rumi had a lot of harshness in him too. And this book is all about what he calls lion energy. And lion energy, when it comes through you, is the ability to say no. And Coleman says, you say no and you wait for something vast to enter. There's something beautiful in men. I love that in men, when you can say, no more, no. And so for me, I have nothing more profound other than to say he had some lion energy in him at that moment.
I was struck by the paradox of go to all this trouble of bucketing out and dealing those wild men, those energies. And yet we can't live with the wild man. And we're sent away. He tests us and we are sent away with love. I mean, come back and talk to me anytime. So, and then he has to leave the wild man. So I think there, in my way of thinking, or maybe you'd like to comment on being with when it's appropriate to be with the wild man and use those energies and the fact that we can't be with them all the time.
One of the beautiful things about Robert's commentary, is the distinction between wildness and savagery. That's fucking dynamite right there. You can think about nothing else for 10 years and you're in good shape if you can make that distinction. Secondly, he says there isn't a man in Greece that would say, I am Zeus. But there's plenty of men in the West that say, I am the wild man. It's...
In the early 1990s, there was a fellow who read this material and pursued it diligently, and did workshops and weekends called that the Wild Man Weekends. And there was a way in which the naivete and the ignorance that many of us demonstrated in the early days, but led many people to believe that that was a permanent state that you wanted to stay in on a regular basis. And in 1991, at the first International Men's Conference, there was a big uproar about the use of that term, as if it was to describe a state that one wanted to achieve, aspire to, and then stay in. And one of these days I'll write more about that. But it didn't go very well. And for a short time, he made a tremendous amount of gold. A tremendous amount of gold. And now he's not even a memory in this thing called the men's movement. But he made a tremendous amount of gold. No.
No, he kept it.
No.
So this is one of the dangers of this thing, is that there's a movement between the village and the forest that has to happen in our lives. You know, we go out for initiation, we come back in to deliver what we got. If we try to bring all of that that's out there into the village, into the city, then it just becomes domesticated. We eviscerate it. So if we want to keep it alive, if we want to keep that connection alive, then we have to allow it, this dialectic, to happen.
That's why you go in the back door.
Well, that's a good reason to go in the back door.
Two little things. One is very easy in this story to forget how long the time span it's occurring over. It's very easy to fall into thinking this is happening in a period of weeks or months. It's not. It's happening over a period of maybe 20 years, maybe longer. That's one thing. Secondly, without the contact with the wild man, he never ever would have picked the wild flowers. That's a very delicate... So the wild man connects you to a type of courtship to the beauty. Without the connection to the wildness, there is something artificial or clumsy in the way we approach what we love. We approach it, the beauty in the tower. So there is some sense that it's still bubbling in him, but when it comes to the beginnings of how to present himself, that's still there. The wild flowers will please her more.
Now, my small group did a lot of work on this period with the wild man yesterday at lunch, and we were interested in particular the gold in the fingertip, the golden hair, the head of golden hair, and that this is a progression and a training process, because clearly the wild man knew what would happen if he put the boy beside the spring. And the images that we came up with, I was having trouble with the single hair. What is the single hair? We started thinking, well, gold in the fingertips might be the learning of an art, the ability to write, the ability to play a musical instrument, the ability to paint. It's in your hands. And then the single hair, the detail there was not that he just had a single hair, but that he put it in his pocket. So he went from having gold in his hand to having gold in his pocket to having gold in his psyche, a head of golden hair. And at that point, he could no longer stay with the wild man, not because he was being punished, but because he was being graduated into the road, the next step.
Just
building a little bit on that, in the sense of not staying with the wild man, I guess one of the images that really stays for me is this walled garden, and particularly the wall in the garden, which for me suggests almost a saying, talking about just saying no. It's defining a space for yourself, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that process of, if you heard that it is about kind of saying no or containing, or in the world it can be overwhelming, and with gifts it perhaps can seem overwhelming once you do discover a sense of your own gold. What the hell do you do with it? And you step out to the garden for the first time and you have this patch, and then say a little more about that.
Most of the guys in this room know much more about that than I do. You know.
One of the sections in the book there, Iron John talks about this a little bit, and it's about boundaries and limits. And the flying boy, the puer eternus, or whatever you want to call them, they don't have boundaries, and they don't have limits. And part of what this container, this wall, this for me is representative of the need for boundaries. I remember when I was a young man, I used to dream a lot about this convertible that I had, my first car, but it never, the top was never up on it. And in my dreams, and then one dream in my mid-30s or late 30s, the top finally came up in the dream, and I realized I had boundaries and limits, whereas before I had none. I didn't know what they were.
And John, was there a kind of a grieving that went along with
Absolutely.
that? Or was it at some place?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, that loss of that boundaryless feeling, you know, is certainly a part of that. But again, this is the thing that he said several times, is we're talking about years in the making of that dream. Then years of grieving of that. You know, not a night or a day or a week, but years in making where the top finally came up, and then years of grieving that the top finally came up, you know.
The garden is also where the lovers meet. The garden is the place where the lovers meet. And he's had an experience at the forest, which is not the same thing. You grow exotic herbs, and there's a tension, and it's a designated area. Do you remember the cook we were talking about as a magician, somebody that can squeeze things into new shape and heat things up? The garden is a place where the lovers meet. It has shady little intimate places where small things can grow, and they're protected from violent winds. There's something about that, and again, a lovely detail in the book. I remember Robert talking about how often there can be men in late middle age that decide they want to study medieval English, and they go back to college, and they have fewer friends. I love that. We all need less friends, probably. And they study that subject, and in some way they cultivate a walled garden inside themselves. When I first discovered this book, and as I said to you guys, I was sort of sucking on the crack pipe and living on the outskirts of London. The little room that I lived in had no kitchen or anything like that, and it was above a garage, and day and night they were pulling cars apart and putting them back together. And I'm up there with this little book, and it was the image of the walled garden. I thought, well, if I could start to grow something like that in my chest, maybe I could live another day. So something about that.
I'd like to ask you to do something, if you would. I want everybody to stand up and stretch for just a minute. It seems I've been sitting for a while. Maybe this will get the conversation flowing a little bit. Oh, mama. Any sound or sigh or deep breath that you want to take that articulates your feeling about the story or what spoken this morning, but just breathe for a few moments and let your body sort of sway, or maybe a little bit of a drum there or something. You know. A dancer or two is out there, you know, if they want to dance. Getting kind of stiff in the old age.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. Whew. So, what has been suggested is that